metaphor in the word, you know, we're going to, you know, that is, if you like, the single causative element. And of course, if you're a traditional Marxist, you say class struggle leads you. Or gender struggle, if you're a feminist, is going to lead you. That's the cutting edge. Or if you're an idealist, a Hegelian, you'll say it's ideas that really matter. And then there's a whole movement right now which kind of says, well, forget all the ideology, you know, just people by doing things are changing the world. I.e., out of daily life are coming all of these transformations which are going to change the world in radical ways. My view is we cannot take any one of these elements as somehow or other determinate, but they are all interlinked together and they co-evolve. And how they co-evolve is crucial to understanding the dynamics. And actually, if you look at the history of urbanization, what you'll see is a co-evolution of all of those elements. Sometimes this pushes the element harder than others. Sometimes it is class struggle. Sometimes it is a technological dynamism. Sometimes it is ideas that are changing the world. Sometimes, you know, but it is the co-evolution in all these elements that really matters. And when we're evaluating something, we should think of that as a holistic system, if you like, of interactive moments in the historical geographical process. In the case of Sol, we discussed his ideas for about 15, 20 minutes, and then Isozaki got tired of it and said, there's only one thing that matters here, and that's mental conceptions. And he went back to squares and circles, and that was it. But afterwards it was very interesting because Isozaki and Minnie Mask came to me and said, well, yeah, that's sort of an interesting way of framework of thinking about, you know, where do you know, have you written that up, where'd you get it from, this kind of stuff. And I said, well, actually, and I did a stupid thing. I said, well, actually, it's all from footnote 4 in chapter 15 of Marx's Capital, volume 1. Now, when you say that kind of thing, two things happen. They either think you are an absolute idiot because you haven't got an idea of your own in your head. All you do is go around parroting Marx, and in this case it was even worse, you're parroting a footnote in Marx. Or people get terrified. Because if Marx said something that sensible in a footnote in chapter 15, then maybe the rest of it is important too. And oh my God, if we get into that, that's death. So after I said that, neither Isozaki or Maas talked to me the rest of the time we were there. I think that this idea, however, is very important and is potentially very powerful. But in order to understand how it works, you have to start to think about what it is that is inside of all of those elements that powering the system along to create urban environments and how that works. Now here's a very simple set of simple ideas I'd like to put together, and it's going to be incredibly simple. Probably too simple. First off, when you think about cities, no matter when you're thinking about them, in order to make a city, you have to have a surplus product. And throughout history, from their very inception, city making was based upon the mobilization, concentration, and utilization of a surplus product. The surplus product has to come from somewhere. Who makes the surplus product? Who mobilizes it? So actually, cities have always been constructed by some sort of class power configuration. The mobilizers of the surplus product, it could be a religious oligarchy, it could be a military emperor, it could be, but somebody's got to mobilize the surplus. And when they mobilize the surplus, they can do a number of things with it. And at least historically, in some cases at least, they made some very beautiful things out of these surpluses. You go see the Alhambra or you go see something like the Acropolis, or you go to Venice, and you see some astonishingly beautiful things, but whenever I see them, I always spare a thought for those who made the surplus product. It usually was extracted by violence, and very often under dire and miserable conditions. But at least the people who did it had the decency to leave us with some very, very beautiful architecture and the like, which is not necessarily what you would say about today. Now, in the past, mobilizing the surplus product was always a haphazard kind of process. It depended on political power, and political power declined, the surplus product declined, Rome declined, Greece declined, you know, all the rest of it. But something very special happened with the rise of capitalism. Because again, if you read your Marx, you'll find that what is capitalism about? It's about the pursuit of surplus value. Capitalists perpetually are looking for surplus value or profit. And the only way they're going to get surplus value is to produce a surplus product. Therefore, by definition, capitalism is always producing the necessary conditions for urbanization to occur. And out of this arises, from the 18th century onwards, an inner connection between the dynamics of capital accumulation and the dynamics of urbanization. It's a complicated relation. It's not simply that the dynamics of capital accumulation produce urbanization, because in exactly the same way that the technology does not produce the relation to nature. So we have to think about this as a co-evolution of the urbanization process and the capital accumulation process. Now then, what do capitalists do? Again, I tell you a very simple story. They start in the morning with a certain amount of money. They go into the marketplace. They buy a commodity called labor power. They select a technology. In some cases, purchase the technology. They purchase raw materials, means of production. And they put all of that together and they produce a new commodity. And then they sell that new commodity for more money than they laid out at the beginning of the day. So at the end of the day, they end up with more. The surplus. That's where the profit is. Now then, the big question is, what do they do the next day? Now, if there are normal people like you and I, you consume it away and have a good time. But capitalists can't do that because they're faced with what Marx called the coercive laws of competition, which say that capitalists, in order to survive, have to reinvest part of their capital in the expansion of the system. Because if they don't invest their capital, somebody else surely will, and so competition forces capitalists to reinvest a part of the surplus they got yesterday in the expansion of the system, which means the next day they need more labor power, maybe a new technology, more means of production, more in terms of the market. And this suggests that there are certain barriers which capitalists face to the continuation of the system. One barrier is the labor supply. You need enough laborers, and you need them to be disciplined, and you need them to be under control. So labor control throughout the whole history of capitalism has been absolutely vital. And there are various ways in which you can do it. You can do it politically, you can do it militarily, or you can take your capital and you can go somewhere else where there's, labor which has not yet been proletarianized. There are all sorts of things you can do. On the new means of production side, again, what this does is to put incredible pressure on natural relations, resource extraction. If you can't find enough labour supply, you're going to get a crisis of some kind. It's a barrier which you've got to overcome. If you can't find the resources, you're going to have a